This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
I'm Eric Sloan, VP of Data and Strategy at Thrive Digital.
Hi, my name is Chris Erickson, and I'm a Performance Manager.
Hi, I'm Courtney Ram, and I'm a Performance Manager.
I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchette. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got some exciting new guests here. They are what I would consider to be Black Friday veterans in the agency. And so we're excited to have them on for the topic because today's hypothesis is that your Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales could be a lot better than they are. So yeah, we're diving in and nitpicking people's Black Friday plans today for performance marketers.
Oh, I've just been really looking forward to this conversation. I feel like I start thinking about Black Friday in like June or something. But yeah, it's been a few years since I've actually run some campaigns. So I'm looking forward to talking to you both.
Yeah, likewise.
It is funny. I feel like as marketers, like our Black Friday starts in what, summertime, would you guys say?
At least I feel like, a lot of brands that are really leaning into Black Friday and like really are reliant on anything that's around the sale, they're doing it as early as like the late spring, early September.
Wow.
A lot of brands will even start thinking about it even immediately after, because most brands will do reviews at the end of their Black Friday period, and a lot of that already starts a lot of conversations about what they want to do the following year. So it's almost like a full year process with just like emphasis put on it in certain parts of the year, or it dies down in other parts.
Yeah, it's so annoying as a marketer. We have to wait an entire year. I wish we could just have one every month, and and then you get to test a bunch of things and like learn so much faster, all that kind of stuff. It takes too damn long.
No, that's how we know you've been out of the game too long, Eric.
Oh, maybe.
They do not feel that way.
We're fine with just the one, but we'll be okay with some mini sales in between for sure.
Okay, sounds good.
So then I guess question one is, what do you think marketers get wrong about running digital ads for big events? Like, what do you think they're getting wrong right now?
It really comes down to a lack of planning. We did touch on it a little bit before, but, a lot of people can be reactive, forgetting, Cyber Week is approaching. And then that's when they start kind of figuring out, putting their ducks in a row and ultimately kind of slapping things together in a way that hopefully their creative team can kind of jump in, create something that they're aligned with the brand, but maybe ultimately is not going to drive the best performance, and not really overly thinking about all these different nuances that are going to, of course, really move the needle, whether it's what's happening on the website. Do things have to kind of change to make sure that we're thinking about the user experience as they approach the site and, of course, hopefully purchase. And with all of that in mind too, is that the quicker we can have everything kind of done in beforehand, the more time that we have when it comes to making sure that we're really intentional with the budget management and planning, which to me is like probably the most important part of it all. Really leaning into those key moments and not just thinking about it as a full week and allocating it evenly, but really being really strategic about how we spend the budget, but where and when as well.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the attention can go towards the offer and sort of the communication of that offer, and not really thinking about that periphery, right? I have seen numerous times where, the creative that comes out of a brand around Black Friday, Cyber Monday is just talking about the offer. It's like 40% off. Well, it's 40% off what? Like, I don't even know who your brand is from looking at this ad. And the only way that you can actually do that is if you have really, really distinctive, brand assets and branding and really high awareness and all of that. And that just goes to show that so much of the work sort of happens around the actual day, around Black Friday, around ad campaigns, etc.
The planning aspect that we were alluding to earlier is really, really important. We were kind of joking that it's like a full year planning cycle, but like realistically, there's so many things that need to come into like perfect lockstep going into this time period that it takes a lot of that planning. So things like what Courtney was mentioning before about like, what's the urgency messaging? Does the messaging in the creative match what's on the website? Is the website fully automated? Do we have audience expansions? Do we know what our creative strategy is? Are we going to do any testing? What sort of timelines are needed to create this creative? are we in line with our clients on that? And like all that type of stuff can take like months and months of making sure that we're on the same page, especially when you're working through with creative teams, because that production can take a long period of time. So I think what a lot of advertisers get wrong is not having these conversations until we start to roll into October and people start thinking about it a little bit more, when these conversations should have happened, latest realistically in the middle of the summer to at least get the ball rolling. I would say that's probably like the biggest thing from my perspective that I've seen in the past, that advertisers can get kind of caught up and chase the deadlines a little bit instead of being in front of it, saving everybody some gray hairs.
Yeah, there's lots of gray hairs from Black Friday, Cyber Monday. One more thing I would actually add to that we haven't talked about, that marketers do get wrong, or that I've seen marketers get wrong, is thinking that you can't spend too much. And I really think that, and I know that every marketing team is going to be constrained in some way by how much they can spend. But because you see those ROAS numbers jump, because like all of the efficiency metrics that you monitor go through the roof on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, you kind of think, oh, we can increase the budget without losing efficiency. A return on ad spend has still gone from, a business as usual of 4.5 to 9 or something like that on Black Friday. And so we can't be spending too much. When in reality, I think that the goal is really to try to capture as much of that market demand as you can while spending as little as possible, right? I mean, you don't want to spend too much because you're just capturing that demand. You're probably sacrificing some profit through the actual offer that you're offering on Black Friday and Cyber Monday as well. And so, that balance, I think, is something that marketing teams sometimes don't give enough thought to.
I think that not only do we hyper focus on the before, or we hope to at least have a good planning, and of course during as well. And to your point, like the budgets, like how are we spending those things? What are the messaging, etc. But where I also see a lot of misses would definitely be when people are neglecting what happens afterwards. I think that you drive a lot of purchases, you drive a lot of traffic, and then you grab all this potentially new customers, and then you don't have a very strong or solid strategy to back it up later. I think where you're thinking about 30 to 60, 90 days, how can we retain them, and thinking about like the customer lifetime value and making sure that they become a purchaser again, and not just in these like big sales moments. And of course, you're going to have those people that are only want to purchase during those sales, and that's fine. But what if you were able to capture people again and again, and remind them of your product? And or if you're a CPG brand, for instance, like, is it time to grab a new one? If it's a brand that you can cross-sell, I think there's a lot of missed opportunities because you get so excited about these great numbers and great purchasers, but it's definitely something to consider as like a overall cycle with the retention, not just like it being right after, but less 30, 60, 90. How do we engage them again?
Yeah, I think that's so important. The LTV of the customers that you acquire on Black Friday could very well be different, right? I mean, we've seen customers or clients where their customer base completely changes on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, right? And so they're capturing kind of a different part of the market, and that LTV is different. And so are you applying that same, the same unit economics on your acquisition over Black Friday, Cyber Monday? That could be a big mistake and actually make the entire holiday less profitable or even unprofitable.
Definitely.
Something that I want to ask, when we've kind of started to touch on a little bit, but I'd love to know how much of the success or failure of your sales events are determined by the marketing you do before the holiday weekend.
I think it's a lot of it has to do with the build up. One thing marketers like to do leading up to these periods is increase a lot of their like top of funnel and awareness plays. One, just to make sure that the awareness of your brand is out there. And Eric alluded to this earlier, but if we're just only messaging offers, but no one knows what the brand is, the likelihood of the conversion drops quite significantly. Whereas if we're able to go into these heavy sale periods with, well, one, a very high awareness of our brand, it will help. But then also, that's will also make sure that our marketing pools, for example, are also very full as well. So we can then convert them, getting the users in the funnel before the period even starts. And using that, then we can be really setting ourselves up for success, as opposed to just saving our budget for a week-long period or whatever it is during the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, like key area, where like you might see still like relatively high increase in in sales numbers just due to the promotional aspect of that time period, but it is nothing compared to what it could be as long as if you were more appropriately leading up to it with advertising activity.
Yeah, I think it hugely makes an impact. I think that where I've seen the most like potential is that though people are really taking advantage of those times before where you are doing a ton of testing, et cetera, because you don't want to be, in my opinion, putting in so much testing during those big cycles because it's a lot of risk. So if you can have a roadmap that you feel solid about and you have a very thoughtfully planned strategy of what you want to test and taking those learnings and being able to adapt them to a big sale is going to make that impact that I'm sure that and splash that you want to, rather than, waiting till Cyber Week comes and going, oh, we don't have much that we can go off of, or let's try to test this and that, because of course that's important to some degree, but putting all your eggs in one basket and hoping for that this is going to make the impact we want is definitely a risk that you don't want to be taking.
So I'm curious then, if we were to sort of order the three main components, so we have like the power of the brand, which would be, your messaging before Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and all of that. And so like how much sort of awareness have you kind of built up? The offer itself, so like what it is you're offering to the market. And keep in mind, from my perspective, that would be the offer in the context of the market too, right? And so you can have a better offer year over year, but it still be worse than what your competitors are doing. And so that might actually make it worse. So the offer is there as well. And then same day distribution of the messaging. So out of those three, how do we think we would order those in terms of priority? Because I would actually probably put like brand and then offer and then same day distribution as the third item. Happy to be wrong here though.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think those top two that you said are pretty hard, because like if you have a world-class brand marketing like history at the company you're working with, and you have that brand recognition, like these like large big brands, you will have more of a higher likelihood, even if you have a less of a offer that's available, the likelihood that someone will convert on you versus a competitor will be a lot higher. Where my concern would be for there making it like a hard rule is that, especially if you're like a middle tier brand or a smaller brand that maybe is like newer to the market or doesn't have that brand recognition, you would probably be likely more leaning on that promotion within the context of the market to get people through the door, especially if there's not a huge differentiation between your product or service or whatever it is and then other competitors, just because without that brand recognition, you're going to have to make up for it another way. And that's not to say that like maybe down the road, yeah, like the branding can make up that difference. And then those 1 and 2 might shift. But I would say it depends on the company's like position within the market as they currently stand in their maturity.
Yeah. So I guess we agree then, because like if you took two kind of equal promotion campaigns and one was run for a big brand and one was run for a brand that has less awareness in the market, right? In the same industry, the big brand is still going to win, right? And so I think that that's so important, and we can't forget that when in the lead up, right? Like we have to really understand what our competitors are doing and sort of how the brand has been performing in the market in the lead up to Black Friday, Cyber Monday too.
Yeah, and I think that the lead up it's going to be so dependent on the brand, like both of you were saying. But I also would challenge how long do we want to have this brand awareness? Like it will also differ based on a brand as well, because some people might be thinking about a purchase that has maybe a bit more value behind it. You have to put a bit more investing or put money aside towards it, rather than maybe a CPG product that is not going to break your bank account. So I feel like that definitely makes a lead time of like what makes the most sense to get people thinking about your brand in a way that's still going to attribute to that sale, because there will be such a difference when it comes to brands and how long you want to do the whole play with a brand awareness.
Right.
That's so true, right? Because like no matter what the sale is, the way that I'm going to buy a lip gloss that I don't think about for however much money, if I've never heard of it before, is so much different than buying a car that might have a discount, right? Like, because they're just such different sales cycles, and brand awareness is so much more important for one of those two things.
But I mean, how many people here do some Black Friday shopping before Black Friday and just like leave the carts open and try to understand like what it is they want. And then when Black Friday happens, you sort of like go to all your carts and you see what the discounts are and make your decision from there.
I feel like that would be the smart thing to do, but I currently do not do that. And I will be doing it this year, but I think that would be an interesting play to analyze if you're not the only one that's doing that, which I'm assuming you're not, is measuring that as well to see like, is there a huge uptick of, what we would call ad cart abandoners than more than anything, because if we see that as being an increase, how do we get them to return back to the cyber with a new offer as well? That's a really good, I think that's a strategy that maybe should be leaned into a bit more to capture people like yourself that are doing some cost comparisons to maybe bigger ticket items.
Yeah, I learned that from Balbina, I think.
It could also be a situation to look into either optimizing or targeting specifically new customers versus existing customers. I mean, it's not a hard set rule based off of this, but I would like to think that if you're going to specific brands and looking at adding things to your cart, there's the likelihood anyway is higher that you've already purchased from them in the past. So if you are able to set up your campaigns to optimize towards new customers or set up your targeting to kind of more focus on that, if you have that LTV knowledge to be able to like better adapt your bidding to focus on those higher, I guess, incremental users versus the users that might purchase anyway, it could be a way to mitigate some of that, I guess, potential lower incremental revenue that you might see coming through people like yourself, Eric, or Balbina, that go in and do the pre-shopping and then see what's available afterwards.
Something that you said earlier, Court, that I want to ask about, actually this question comes by way of our creative director, Tyler, who wanted me to ask this. You talked about testing not being a good idea during Black Friday, and he wanted to know if you ever recommend doing any creative testing around these types of big events, or if you think it's better to stay with safer, proven, tested assets. What he's kind of driving at was he said that it seems like the volume of eyeballs might be a good time to make tests. So curious to hear your opinions about that.
Yeah, so I definitely would say that you should test, absolutely, but I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I wouldn't be trying out a new strategy across the board on such an impactful day. But I feel like, if you're not testing, you're not improving, you're not learning. So, and I don't think that shies away from these big sales either. And to your point, this is a great opportunity to collect data, drive traffic to the site to get some information of what people are looking at. This is a really valuable time above all. Like, of course, the bottom line for most brands are going to be those purchases and efficiency when it comes to ROAS numbers, et cetera. But it also gets a good idea of who our audience is to play around with as well. So, and what they're doing, of course, on the website, even if they're not purchasing. So I would say that the amount of testing you do is going to really be dictated by the budget you have and the impact that you want. So let's say, you have maybe a brand that's not that focused on the revenue. They do super well year over year. It's a nice cherry on top when they have these sales, but it's nothing going to be driving, as much of an impact for, say, a brand that's so reliant on these key sales to kind of move the needle for a revenues perspective. They might be more inclined to do testing, rather, testing new messaging, new audiences, new channels, et cetera. So I think it really does come down to the comfort level as well of that you need to have these open discussions well in advance with your partners and brands to say, hey, like how confident do you feel with us doing this, and having a really solid plan of what you want to test and what those risks are going to be, but also the reward of it. If we're not testing, different creatives during these times and we're just doing the same iteration over and over again, we could be really missing out on some really key insights. So I think that there is definitely an opportunity to test, and I definitely think you should, but I wouldn't put, more than 50% of the budget towards these testing unless you have a massive budget and there's such flexibility and a desire to test and take these opportunities away from perhaps channels that could be kind of leading into creative testing.
Awesome. Eric, I feel like you're our local stand for testing. I feel like you're the mascot of testing at Thrive. So interested to hear.
Yeah, well, like I've always recommended not to test, right?
This is a new take. I just want to wave a big flag here.
So what I mean by that though is like, it's not don't try new things. It's don't think about it from the perspective of, creating this like really structured, statistically significant sort of result kind of thing, right? For example, we tend not to recommend doing any kind of like geo-testing or anything like that around Black Friday as well. There's an opportunity cost of like turning off advertising in part of the country. There is the sort of flip side of that. You can run a geo-test where you actually heavy up in part of the country. But still, you're not really going to get any information that is useful in the context of the rest of the year, right? So even if you get a statistically significant result on some kind of test, when are you going to use it? You're going to have to wait until next year. And next year, the context will be completely different. Your competitors will be different. The market will have changed as well. Who knows? Maybe the macro market has changed considerably. So I really don't know why we would need to run, these really highly structured tests. However, it's taking a swing, right? And so you want to have the best creative that you think you can create in market. You want to have them in campaigns that you think are going to drive, the biggest outcome, and across as many channels as your budget allows for, right? And so I think that getting high probability shot into the market for Black Friday and Cyber Monday is the goal. And so do your testing ahead of time and try to understand how the market is connecting with your communications, and then put it into market over Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and see what works. And that's the kind of testing that I would say is sort of throwing it into market, reacting in real time if you can, and making adjustments as you go.
I think in an ideal world too, not every brand is going to have those opportunities where maybe they just have Cyber Week as like their only sales, but very unlikely that's the case. So to your point, Eric, I think that where there's comfortability with testing is during those little bit of those smaller moments and micro moments of sales as well. So typically you might have like a Labor Day weekend sale, or you have some kind of other sale that you've, historically run. Take those as a bit more of an opportunity to lean into the, the creative testing, the messaging, maybe doing a bit of testing. But overall, I think testing needs to be happen, but not to a significant way. Of course, to your point, geo-testing, anything that's going to be, at risk of losing a lot of revenue, regardless if that's not your like main KPI, is not the approach you want to take. It's these micro moments and before, that's where like testing is. And, to the question before of, is it really what's marketing important before? Like, absolutely. And even more specifically, these sales and taking the learnings to adapt to these bigger moments.
I think too, it's about the risk versus reward of any sort of testing. I think we're all in agreement that any sort of like geo testing, go dark testing during this period is not a good idea. But when it comes to things like messaging testing, like we can definitely use the smaller promotional periods throughout the course of the year to do some like sandbox testing. That being said, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is going to be a different beast in terms of like basically, well, I wouldn't want to say every company, but a lot of companies are going to be discounting during this period. So it is a bit of a different beast. I would say personally, if it's a really short period, like let's say you're just doing 5 days, for example, doing any sort of A/B testing to get any sort of even directional read on a creative messaging is still going to be risky. You're going to have to run it at a lower efficiency. And if you're only doing 5 days, that is a potentially high risk to top line. In a case like that, it might not make sense. However, some brands, as we start to go, you're seeing Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales that are going on for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Like sometimes, like you start seeing messaging in October sometimes. And if that's the case, I think like you can take a weekend, for example, and like do a quick A/B test and just get a quick read and see, because like running 2 days at a slightly less efficiency over a 3.5 week promotional period can provide that lift to make up for that inefficiency difference. But if it's a very short, very intense promotional period, try to figure out what you want to message from a data-driven way before going into those sales, because it's just too short and too intense of a period to risk that type of revenue. Especially because a lot of brands really rely on this to hit not only top line month numbers, but like top line quarter and even annual revenue targets. So yeah, you don't want to be messing around with that if you have a lot of importance set aside on 5 days, let's say.
I think that's such a good point. The testing around like the pre-period can be really insightful as well. And that can be A/B testing. That can be a number of different things. But that style of incrementality testing or geo testing can also work in that situation, especially if a marketing team is really trying to prove out the efficacy of doing an awareness campaign in the lead up to Black Friday, for example. You can do that in a smaller part of the country. You don't have to do it across the entire country. You don't have to spend a ton of money either. The smaller the region that you're testing it in, the less budget that you need. And if you see that Black Friday is better in that region as a result, then that's kind of your outcome in that case. The problem with doing any kind of mid or top funnel in the lead up to Black Friday is that if you're looking through an attribution lens, that can be really tough because you can have a lot of people who are waiting, right? And so you might actually see lower performance from those types of campaigns in the 2 to 3 weeks in the lead up to Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And that can be a problem for marketing teams that are held to a number, right? And so finding ways to sort of prove out that strategy and showing that, hey, those dollars weren't driving immediate sales, but Black Friday, Cyber Monday was actually better in those regions that we did this strategy. And so, unfortunately, as we said at the top, we have to wait another year in order to rerun it. But at the same time, then you've learned something that you can carry over to other promotional periods.
Since we're already here, then I'll ask, what data points should marketers be gathering or making specific note of during the sales like this year for better insights next year? Like, what would you say that marketers need to jot down in their little notebook to bring back?
I think that understanding the sort of competitive landscape and the market is something that a lot of marketing teams probably don't dive deep enough into. So understanding what were the actual offers in the market from your competitors. Are they better or worse than last year? Do they represent a sort of commodification of the offers in your particular market, right? And so if you're selling in a very specific niche, are the offers getting homogenous, right? Are they getting basically the same? How does your offer compare to those offers by competitors in your market? So things like that I think are important. Trying to understand how aggressive your competitors are being in terms of advertising as well can tell you a lot about sort of the success or failure of their own Black Friday, or at least what they thought the market was going to say. The other thing I would say though is taking a look at how the business was performing in the lead up to Black Friday and then seeing the magnitude of that bump, right? So how much did sales increase? How much did your organic search traffic or even impressions through Search Console, how much did those go up? Because that can really tell you a lot about how the market is sort of perceiving, your brand through that Black Friday, Cyber Monday period. So really just trying to understand almost like the year-over-year comps with context, as opposed to just year-over-year comps. Hey, we did, $1 million extra, so everyone pop champagne. Maybe you could have done 2, right? Maybe it actually wasn't big enough. And looking at the context, I think, is how you get there.
For me as well, I think the one really main thing I always look at, and sometimes I feel like can be forgotten, but you learn so much from it, and we touched on it already kind of, is that cart abandonment rates. I feel that it's important for you, of course, to look at it before to make sure that there's nothing breaking or were people leaving off that could be super impactful, but also make your sales not meet the targets because something's broken. What are customers getting hung up on? And I think that story should be something you're looking at during and of course after, because a lot of people are taking these less opportunities to get something very discounted, but you might see that the cart abandonment is still super high or increasing. And this could be attributed to maybe they see how much shipping is and it's not really worth the discount. Perhaps there's other things that they're looking at than other costs that are not being associated, that are basically the sale is not as, our offer is not as appealing, I'd say. And of course those are things that need to be considered moving forward as well. I mean, you may not be able to shift shipping costs or anything of that regard, but I think it does tell a lot of a story of the success and those pain points that are not only going to be impacted during a big sales that typically would really drive up the revenue, but overall sales throughout the year too.
Your overall, I guess, user behavior, about how much that changes during a promotional period like this, where brands will be heavily discounting, like looking at how things change. Like, for example, let's say top products, like usually brands, assuming they're not seasonal, will have a general list of top products that will say more or less consistent. That being said, like sometimes over Black Friday, Cyber Monday, you'll see that shift a little bit, which is a bit of an indicator that maybe your user base or user behavior is shifting a little bit during this time period. And it's like less maybe your usual base and more people looking for sales. So like understanding that can also help better, I guess, will one come up with the offer for the next year, or at least help the messaging of it, just making sure that we're getting the right message in front of the right people. That's really going to be moving that revenue needle during the promotional period.
Yeah, I love that. It's not just conversions, it's real people on the other end. And their user behavior changes, and better understanding that can only make you a better marketer in other times of the year too, for sure.
Yeah, Eric, you touched on this a little bit in the beginning as well, and I feel it really does resonate and makes a lot of sense, is also making sure that you're collecting a data point around customer retention. I think that it's a great opportunity to see if these are these one-time purchasers, because often attracting new customers is, costly. And rather than, seeing what this customer retention number would be in a lifetime value situation, and hopefully become brand loyalists and being able to measure that up as well. And having those two buckets and being able to see how can we make these one-time purchasers and adapt them to our strategy to then get them into the loyalists, and comparing those numbers in a year-to-year standpoint and just over a time frame as well, and not just looking at it at one specific time period, but how it evolves over time and seeing if there is any attribution to that.
I love that, Court. I used to work in a very large retailer during college in their store location. And one of the things our store manager said really applies here. She was always like, these aren't our regular customers coming out on these sales days. She's like, but if you treat them well enough, they could be. She's like, so do not treat our sale guests poorly, because those could be people that could become regular ones. And so she made sure to remind us that of every sales season. And I think that's true in the online retail space too, right? Like those could be regulars if you treat them nicely during sales.
And I think that's where leveraging those lists is so critical. A lot of the times we're not changing our strategy. I've seen it in the past where people are not really changing their strategy. They're just sticking their ads right into their campaigns with the same targeting, et cetera, and not really leveraging really key lists and purchaser information. Maybe they were one-time purchasers, maybe they're only Cyber Week purchasers, but we still should be speaking to them and seeing if there's a way to keep them in that cycle as well. And I think that you totally nailed it, that it's the way that we approach them and making sure that we're thinking about them as loyalists throughout, not just that one-time purchaser, and leveraging that data in an effective way, so that we, of course, can, capture those people, but also net new people that are similar to.
It opens up a lot of cross-selling opportunities. Like Courtney said, if you're leveraging those lists, whether it's a complementary product or a similar product, utilizing that, as long as you're able to collect that type of data, like even like well post the sale, if you know that they purchase a product that goes well with another product, it's a perfect opportunity for a higher likely conversion. So definitely, if you can get that data and utilize it, it should be utilized.
It feels like such a simple thing, but it's quite wild how many times you do go in and see that it has never been used in the past. And, whether you're doing an audit and you're like, this is such key information, this is such valuable stuff. And not only should you not just use it during Cyber Weeks, but how are you using it for other sales? People are maybe likely not just siloed to cyber. They might be really inclined to have those like sales moments. And I think by being strategic about the way that you target, for instance, perhaps I, maybe can't afford certain products just due to the price tag, but I really want to try them. And this was a key opportunity to do so by showing them these purchasers a new sale as well, and really leaning into that. But it is surprising sometimes that people are not using their own data in such an impactful way. It's right there, it's yours to use. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity that's missed because you get super hyper focused on net new and not really speaking to those people that already have tried or even brand loyalists.
So to your mind, everyone, what would you say makes a successful sales event? Like what makes it a success?
I guess hitting targets is too obvious, right?
Listen, low-hanging fruit still tastes good.
As long as those targets are good, right? As long as they aren't bad targets.
I think like the cliche of success looks different for everybody. There are, of course, targets. There's always going to be those shiny numbers that everyone wants, and whether they're realistic or really on point, those do help us when we're optimizing and seeing, able to say like, okay, yes, we achieved that goal. But I think that a lot of bigger brands are leaning a bit away from that nowadays too. They're not just looking at this revenue number, this like really shiny cost per acquisition. They're not looking at those things as much. They're looking at, were we able to capture new audiences? Like what information were we able to capture? How many page views? What is this website things? There's so many things that they're able, and data points we're allowed to capture in such a high volume time that I think a lot of brands that are winning right now are looking at those metrics and not just those bottom line revenue metrics. And ultimately for us, I feel like, success is, if they're happy, we're happy. It's like that, again, that really cliche of your success is our success, but it's true. And I think that ultimately, where I find like my feeling so successful of brands is those that trust us through the whole process, whether it's planning it all the way to the end and feeling that, we're working with them and they can just sit back and relax and not focus on what's going on, and letting us like take the lead there, because the trust is huge. And where I see the most success is partners and brands that are letting us, drive the ship in that regard, and so that they can focus on other key things that, Cyber Week doesn't just happen, or it's not around this ads. There's so many moving pieces that are outside of just the media strategy that they should have their eyes on.
I think Courtney was bang on with like, there's like that bottom line number, but there's a lot of other things that you can learn and help your company or brand grow from these types of sales. But I think also part of what makes a successful sale event or promotional period as well is from a more operational lens about like, how was it executed? Like we're kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but like, did we have a good plan in place from the get-go? Did we start planning early enough? Did we follow the strategy like we wanted to, or did we have errors or hiccups or unexpected circumstances that made us deviate from that? And another way, I guess, looking at the overall success, like if we came up with a strategy and planned it well and executed it well, and we still weren't able to maybe hit our targets, like maybe there's something else at play here, but just making sure that like between, I guess, like even the agency and the brand relationship, that everybody did what they could based off the strategy that we had in mind to be able to do it, and we executed it like we wanted to, I think is another indicator of success. It's never like good, for example, if like a feed goes down or something for a couple of days during a sale period, like things like that can be like quite detrimental. And as long as we have these plans in place for all these circumstances and enough lead time, like that type of thing can really determine the success of a sale period.
Yeah, I feel like that operational piece is easy to take for granted, as something that's just going to happen. But at the same time, orchestrating all of these moving pieces for a 4-day weekend, I realized that a lot of brands are also doing, 4-week promotions. But at the same time, the demand is really in the marketplace for those 2 big days and then a little bit in the weekend. And so orchestrating all of that can be really difficult, and having it go off without a hitch is really, really important. I think the other piece that I would call out here is a balance between not spending too much, but then spending enough to capture the increase in demand, right? And so you don't want to underspend. You don't want to basically not lift budgets at all, because there's going to be additional demand and you want to be able to capture that. You want to get in front of people and hopefully trigger some action there. But you also don't want to spend too much, right? And that can be a really, really tricky balance. And especially because these weekends only happen once a year, it can be really difficult to sort of practice that and fine tune it as well. But I think that every single year, just trying to get to that point of what is the optimal amount where we can spend and we're not wasting any spend, but we're hopefully capturing as much of the demand in the marketplace. I think the other thing that's really important though, and we sort of touched on a little bit with the bottom line stuff, is just making sure that the offer still gives profit to the business while incentivizing the market. That's also a balance piece, right? Because you can offer 10% off and maybe that's not enough, but maybe that's plenty for a brand that has a really, really strong brand, tons of awareness in the marketplace, and maybe they never do sales or something like that, right? 10% may be a huge deal for the fans of that brand.
Sephora.
Yeah. Whereas for other brands, they may have to really cut quite deep into that, right? And so are you still driving profit, but also giving an incentive to the market? And then the last piece, and we talked about it a bit here too, is creative. Like, can the creative cut through the noise? If it's just like every other piece of creative, it's not going to work as effectively as something that cuts through the noise. There's a lot of advertisers, there's a lot of noise, CPMs go up. You want to make it count. And I think that just making sure that the creative is not too safe and not too, I guess, simple. Like there has to be something to sort of cut through some of that noise. And I think that leads to successful Black Fridays too. That was a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, I love that. I really like that you did chat about the budget stuff and that. I mean, we did speak about that a little bit at the beginning around the planning side of things, because it, not being able to have that full plan in place does not allow you to get as granular as you should be getting when it comes to building out budget plan. And whether you are doing it in 4 days or 4 weeks, it is really critical that you're looking at it at like a very specific level. And it's that striking that fine balance of like, you don't want to increase the budget significantly and then have to go through learning phase. And the opposite is true, but that it does play like the psychological thing as well. Is like, at the start of, this really impactful weekend, a lot of people are starting right from the start of the day because they're worried about whether something is going to go out of stock. So it's really critical that we're showing up and we're not delayed in any way, because we could probably move out of potentially losing that sale. But also you may want to consider what it would look like at the end. I see a new trend as well, where a lot of brands are really leaning into that psychology around, oh my gosh, it's the last day of the sale, I need to buy again because I'm never going to see this sale again. Although that's going to happen again next year, but you get in that fear of like, I just need to get it done. And so I think people are where I'm seeing a lot of that trend is doing the boost up in the last couple of days and even adjusting the messaging to say last day or limited supply. Those little things really playing your psyche to think, okay, this is like, what if they never sell this again and I need to stock up? Unless you're not me, who does that all the time, where I buy at the beginning and I buy at the end because I feel like it's just that thing of the urgency that plays a big role in people that do a lot of online shopping.
Sorry, one last thing on that too is as understanding what success means on each day of the sale. You're kind of alluding to it there, Courtney, but each day is obviously going to have drastically different targets, and ultimately you have an aggregated target for the whole period. But what's going to happen on Saturday, Sunday is going to be significantly less than what happens on Friday and Monday. And Monday is usually going to be the biggest day, as is the last day of the sale on Cyber Monday, and brands are using that urgency messaging. And one thing to make sure that we are understanding what makes success as we lead up into that is like, how much are we expecting to get on each day? And then how much are we expecting to get on the last day? And then even at the larger volumes, like how much are we expecting to get at each hour? Because there's the golden period or the golden hour that it's called from about, I think it's like 6 to 11 o'clock at night on the Monday. And like, that's when you'll see like a huge chunk of your sales come through. But I have seen brands panic a little bit because you start to get to 4 o'clock on Cyber Monday and you're pacing way below where you should be. But in theory, it's actually like doing better than they expect. It's just like it hasn't kicked up into overdrive yet. So understanding the historical data too about like, hey, like when does the revenue come? When do we expect to see that revenue come? And what do we need to be achieving to be having a successful period will be really important so that brands don't blow up their whole strategy partway through off of incomplete data and cause themselves more of a headache than if they just left it alone and trusted the process.
For sure.
I really like that you talked about like the Friday and the Monday, because that's usually like the process you want to go into, and that's what most brands will do, is like having those heavy focus. And I think that the one thing that could be always something that you're looking at year over year is, are you one of those brands that's different? Whereas, maybe what you're trying to sell is something that is a bigger ticket item where, maybe it requires two incomes to purchase, and you and your partner, or whoever you're purchasing with, need to kind of sit down and figure that out over the weekend. So I feel like it does change by brands, where it's usually the Friday and the Monday, but I would say it's always a huge recommendation to see what last year's was like, and whether or not there's something to input with your strategy, if whether or not you're a little bit different.
I have one last question. I think it's a trapdoor question from Maddie. She wanted me to ask. Do you think that there's a point where retargeting should be turned off during Black Friday, Cyber Monday?
Never.
Okay.
Never. I feel like if you're doing it right, you should never have it turned off. You may want to reduce it if there's some kind of hesitancy, but in rare cases, I'd ever recommend turning off. It's such a huge, in most cases, part of your strategy. This is why it's super important to do all that, the testing and technical fixes and the stuff beforehand, so you don't run into the issues of feeling like you have to, and making sure that you have a solid remarketing plan that is going to cater to all the customer journey in a really impactful way. I say I would never consider turning it off unless there was a real need for it. Where I would make any adjustments, if required, was reducing the spend. Let's say that frequency is going bananas, then you probably want to consider reducing and putting your budget towards higher funnel, tactics to drive more people into the funnel, because there's probably nothing worse than seeing 500 of the same ads if you're not going to be purchasing. And it's also expensive time to be doing advertising. So I think frequency is something that you need to keep a close eye on, but there's a lot of other ways to go away from it, rather than, pausing and reverting back to just doing a more prospecting approach.
I have two scenarios that I want to run by you both, and we'll see if these are crazy ideas. The first one would be, is there a potential to switch all of your retargeting and basically expand your retargeting list to 180 days or whatever the max is, and then basically switch the optimization over to reach for those periods? So basically you're just trying to reach as many of those people as possible and optimize for that, as opposed to optimizing for conversions. The reason why I'm saying that is when you think about how the optimization algorithms work for optimizing towards purchases, if they suddenly see a spike, and I'm sure that they correct for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, but they certainly won't correct for all promotions. If they suddenly see a spike, are they going to then bid way too high on some of the audience that has that high intent, and you're essentially just spending more on Black Friday and Cyber Monday to get less incremental conversions, because suddenly the optimization algorithm gets really excited and sees that everyone's converting, kind of thing, right? So like, is there a potential to just switch it over to reach and just say, hey, we want to reach as many people from our retargeting audience as we can on these days?
I'd say there's definitely an argument for that. Yeah, I'd be nervous to just say like everybody do it, but I think like with these types of campaigns, like,
well, me too. I haven't tested it. So.
A lot of the time the like retargeting campaigns are almost like, even if they're optimizing towards purchases, they are to a certain degree somewhat bought from a reach and frequency type of standpoint, where you don't want to make your frequency get too high, and you keep it as a general spend share of your overall marketing strategy. So they're like, it in a certain way, it is kind of being, in certain circumstances, purchased like that. And we have seen in the past that with these like really high intent audiences, whether you buy on, let's say a reach campaign on Meta or target impression share on Google for branded search, like these really low funnel channels, that the intent is in certain circumstances high enough that if you can just get in front of that user the cheapest way possible, you will be able to drive like a higher efficiency campaign without letting the algorithm just like bid like crazy. So I think like there's definitely a route to go down, and I think it's something that can be explored. I think it would definitely need testing on a case by case basis, but I think there's certain brands that it also doesn't work for as well. Like very, very high AOV products, for example, like that maybe might not be the play just because the impulsiveness, let's say, is maybe a little bit lower. But yeah, so I long story short, I agree with you, Eric, but I would highly suggest testing it first to make sure it makes sense for the particular brand.
Maybe kind of.
Eric, I really like that you brought that up because I actually just explored that for a partner that was running to something very similar, where they, frequency was going really, really high, weren't seeing the conversion. So like wanted to see whether there's an opportunity. And of course you want to test those things prior to cyber, but if you are really set on making sure that, you're capturing as many people, I think that approach is really interesting and it's something I would definitely consider testing. But I think there's always have to go back to thinking of, if these people haven't already purchased, then is there a reason why? And that's where I would be very cautious, in my opinion, about doing a reach on people that have just gone to the website and not purchased, because maybe there's a reason for it. You might have a small percentage of people that, would take advantage of it and buy during that sales opportunity. But where the test, I think, would be more successful, likely would be the reach for past purchasers, or using like an email list. So we already know it's proved that they're going to have purchased in the past. So it might be a bit more of an efficient approach. But I think that a lot of advertisers are exploring this as they are seeing that the costs are increasing and frequencies as well.
Yeah, and those optimization algorithms just have the ability to just go wild when there are spikes up in conversions.
Absolutely.
Well, friends, I feel like we could get into this even further, but we've got time for today. Thank you all so much for joining this conversation. It was a pleasure. I feel like this is a great tactical episode for our listeners. This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks.